He had dreams of sending rockets to the moon, manifesting a moon child, and has a crater named after him on the moon's dark side. He was a sci-fi junkie, a poet, rocket scientist, a practitioner of the dark arts, and the organizer of elaborate orgies. He was one of the founders of JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, who also performed rituals based on Enochian magic in which he masturbated upon magical tablets to empower them. He was the link between such notables as Aleister Crowley and L. Ron Hubbard, and his mysterious death from an explosion in 1952 has left many wondering if it were an accident or murder. He is Jack Parsons. He was born Marvel Whiteside Parsons in Los Angeles on October 2nd, 1914, to a well-to-do family who came to the West Coast from New England just a year before. After his parents split up, his maternal grandparents moved to California to be with their daughter and grandchild, using their wealth to buy a fancy home in Pasadena on what is known as Millionaire's Mile. Renamed John by his mother and called Jack by his friends, Parsons was not like most other children of his day, spending long hours reading poetry and science fiction, which, one would guess, resulted in him getting endlessly bullied by other kids. Being a geek and an outsider, he did find a friend, though, in Edward Foreman, a mechanically gifted kid from a working-class family. And it was with Foreman in 1928 that he began to tinker with black powder rockets. It was also around this time that he began to tinker with the occult when he attempted to invoke the devil in his bedroom. Now, at this point, some of you might be asking, how can one of the pioneers of rocket science also believe in the occult? Truth is, that's not as strange as you might think, mixing science and the occult, because for many centuries the two were not mutually exclusive. For example, some say that if John Dee, the Elizabethan astrologer, alchemist, and all-around occultist were alive today, he'd probably be a scientist of some sort. And there's Sir Isaac Newton, the man behind Newtonian physics and gravitational theory, who moonlighted as an alchemist searching for the Philosopher's Stone. Anyway, after getting poor grades in high school, Parsons' mother sent him off to Brown Military Academy, a private boarding school, but he was expelled after blowing up a toilet. While a student at USC, Parsons got word of a guy named Frank Molina and his project on rocket propulsion. He and Foreman offered to help, even though neither of them had degrees. They were hired anyway, Parsons being the chemist, Foreman the designer, and Molina the technician. And when the trio applied for funding for their projects, they wouldn't bother to mention that their goal was to send men to space, realizing that in the 1930s, most of the scientific establishment considered the notion science fiction. In 1934, Parsons met Helen Northrop and married her a year later. But to Helen's dismay, most of their family funds went to rocket research. Parsons even had to pawn her engagement ring to make ends meet. The young Rocketeer's first liquid-fueled motor test took place near the Devil's Gate Dam on Halloween 1936. 3 attempts to fire the rocket failed. On the 4th, though, the oxygen line accidentally ignited, billowing fire out at the group. It wasn't long after that that they became known as the Suicide Squad. In 1939, a couple of friends took Jack to the Church of Thelema in Hollywood, where he witnessed the Gnostic Mass for the first time. Already a fan of Aleister Crowley, the founder of Thelema, Parsons began to attend church services on a somewhat regular basis. He grew to believe in the legitimacy of Thelemic magic, accepting its feasibility by way of quantum mechanics. In August 1940, Parsons made it on the cover of the magazine Popular Mechanics. In the article, he'd discussed the possibility of rockets leaving the Earth's atmosphere, maybe even reaching the moon. In 1941, continuing with their occultic studies, Jack and Helen were initiated into the OTO's Agape Lodge. In 1942, after getting a few bucks from the sale of jet engines, Parsons acquired a mansion in Pasadena he christened the Parsonage, which filled up with a weird brew of bohemians, writers, artists, scientists, occultists, who all pitched in to pay the $100 a month rent. Living communally, the parsonage became the new base of operations for the Agape Lodge, where they converted the garage and laundry room into a chemistry lab, held sci-fi readings in the kitchen, slaughtered their own livestock for meat and blood rituals, and performed wild orgies. Encouraged by the OTO's polyamorous sexual ethics, Parsons began to seduce his wife's 16-year-old sister, Sarah Northrop, described as feisty and untamed, proud and self-willed, while Helen had an affair with the head of the OTO's lodge, Wilford Smith. Being an enthusiastic practitioner of Thelema, Parsons willingly sent a portion of his salary to England to help support the aging Crowley. But, as one would guess, his extracurricular activities began to have an impact on his professional life, often showing up at work hungover and sleep-deprived. Rumors of a black magic cult began to permeate the community, so the parsonage came under the scrutiny of both the Pasadena Police Department and the FBI. Wild tales of sex parties, child rape, naked pregnant women jumping through fires, and people attempting to evoke the Antichrist were downplayed by Parsons, who explained to the authorities that the lodge was simply an organization dedicated to religious and philosophical speculation. Finding no evidence of these seemingly outrageous accusations, law enforcement backed down. By 1943, the U.S. was heavily engaged in World War II, and the government saw the benefit of rocketry in the war cause. It was around this time that the Suicide Squad renamed their project the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and in 1944, JPL came under the purview of the U.S. government. It wasn't long after that Parsons was expelled from JPL because of his unorthodox and unsafe working methods. This was most likely due to him being an abuser of alcohol, cocaine, amphetamines, peyote, mescaline, and opiates. Remember, kids, drugs and explosives don't mix. It was around this time that his marriage began to unravel, Helen having become pregnant by Smith, and Parsons was now in love with Sarah. No longer with JPL, Parsons and Foreman started the Ad Astra engineering company. But the FBI grew suspicious of Ad Astra when it was discovered that they got their hands on top secret chemicals, but they were eventually acquitted of any wrongdoing. But the parsonage continued to attract attention in its Pasadena neighborhood with tales of people chanting, wearing animal costumes, togas, weird makeup, and, of course, the orgies. And when there was a vacancy at the parsonage, one ex-resident recalled, "In the ads placed in the local paper, Jack specified that only bohemians, artists, musicians, atheists, anarchists, or any other exotic types need to apply for rooms. Any mundane soul would be unceremoniously rejected." One such exotic type to be attracted to the parsonage was sci-fi writer L. Ron Hubbard. The future founder of Scientology shared a lot of the same interests with Parsons, they quickly becoming fast friends. After Hubbard moved into the house, Parsons wrote to Crowley stating that even though Hubbard had no formal training in magic, he is the most thelemic person I have ever met and is in complete accord with our own principles. Taken to the free love aspects of his new environment, Hubbard seduced Parsons' young girlfriend Sarah, who Crowley denounced as a vampire due to her disruptive nature. Even though he tried not to show it, Parsons was highly jealous, which sent him on a path deeper into black magic, which upset some of the other members of the house. They were concerned with the possibility of negative demonic energies being let loose. In 1946, Parsons decided to take on the ritual he called the Babylon Working to fulfill one of Crowley's prophecies. The aim was to incarnate the thelemic goddess Babylon in human form, and Hubbard insisted on acting as scribe to document the ritual, which Parsons agreed to. The ritual began on January 4th with incantations and the waving of talismans, eventually evolving into Parsons masturbating over prepared sigils as Hubbard took notes while scanning the astral plane. After 11 days of invoking and banishing rituals with the aid of consecrated daggers and sigils doused with semen and animal blood, they returned home to the parsonage to discover a new tenant had moved in, a beautiful red-haired woman named Marjorie Cameron. Here was Jack's Scarlet Woman. Parsons wrote to Crowley, "I have my elemental." Thus began a passionate sexual and magical relationship. Parsons and Hubbard continued the next phase of the working in February, this time trying to bring about the Moon Child, a magical entity brought down from the astral plane. When Crowley got wind of this, his response was, "Apparently Parsons or Hubbard or somebody is producing a Moon Child. I get fairly frantic when I contemplate the idiocy of these louts." This was not what Parsons wanted to hear. It wasn't long after that he sold the parsonage, and with $20,000 he invested in a joint business venture with Hubbard, who was to buy 3 yachts in Florida, sail them through the Panama Canal, and sell them on the West Coast. But this was all a bullshit con job cooked up by Hubbard, he and Sarah taking off with Jack's money and dignity. Disillusioned, Parsons resigned from the OTO, deciding to explore the astral plane on his own, and on October 19th, 1946, he married Marjorie Cameron. But things didn't get much better for Jack. His marriage started to have its problems, and the FBI was again investigating him, but this time on suspicion of espionage, which resulted in him losing his government security clearance. broke and desperate for money, Parsons started a pyrotechnic company for the Hollywood film industry. The couple was able to move into a house right next door to the old parsonage and began to throw parties, rituals, and poetry readings again. On June 17th, 1952, while preparing a batch of explosives for a film, Parsons' lab exploded with a blast so large it could be felt a mile away. The explosion broke his bones, tore off his right arm, and laid open his scalp. He was still conscious when he was discovered, but died on the way to the hospital. When learning of her son's death, his mother took her own life by way of overdose. Jack Whiteside Parsons was only 37 years old. Now, there were rumors that the explosion seemed a bit fishy, that it was impossible that someone with his great knowledge of explosives could die making simple pyrotechnics. But nothing in the way of murder has ever been substantiated. Police concluded that his death was probably a drug-induced accident or maybe even suicide. Thus ends the saga of Jack Parsons, a life lived to extremes, an occultist, pioneering rocket scientist that fully embodied do what thou wilt, and whose magic truly carved a path to the moon. Until next time.